Today I'd like to talk a little bit about imagining, using the imagination. And of course, the human mind is so amazing in its ability to imagine. I mean, if you think about everything that we imagine, it's quite endless. You know, I've never been to Greece, but I can imagine walking on a beach in Greece. I can imagine standing on a mountain in the Himalayas. I can imagine being in the Arctic. I can imagine, a jungle in Africa. It's endless. You can imagine exploring Mars. You know, I wonder what images or what imagining might be in your own mind right now, just hearing this idea and thinking about what we can bring up in the mind. And, a lot of the things I just mentioned are supported by having seen photographs or hearing stories. We can imagine things that we think of as real places, but we can also imagine places that have never existed, you know. We can also imagine living beings of all kinds, whether we've seen them or not, and we can imagine living beings or imaginary beings that we've never seen. We can imagine seeing the Loch Ness monster or any kind of creature. And our imagination is really necessary for creativity. If we want to build a house, we first have to bring it into our imagination in one way or another. And it's kind of a thrill, it can be, to have that house built and materialized, just starting from something we've imagined. And then, of course, imagination can be helpful in these ways, but it can also be harmful. There was someone recently who was telling us about a coworker of his partner, who was a relatively young man who was imagining all kinds of monsters and horrible things and doing a lot of drawings of these things and really going into dark mental states. And we can have that kind of danger in imagination. And last week we talked a little bit about nimittas that come up in the practice, and how Ajahn Mun advised Ajahn Jia about how to work with that. So given the range and the elasticity of how imagination works, it's good to look at how we can use this in the practice, and when to kind of pull back, and when to really explore using our imagination. Pretty long time ago now, I was doing a lot of Qigong, and there's in that practice, I got to explore like where does imagination kind of blend into reality. So in this Qigong training, it was fundamentally medical Qigong, although I was really interested in it for the spiritual experience of working with energy. And the teacher would say, imagination leads the mind and the mind leads the chi. And I got interested because I had been having some medical Qigong treatments, and it started to help me feel energy and be able to move that energy in the body and see the energy. in people and plants and even rocks, and just kind of like there's a whole different way of seeing when you just see things as energy. It's helpful for the practice because then you can understand this idea of all of the things in this conventional reality being sankharas that are not really solid, not really lasting, constantly changing and in motion. And I remember one time I was hiking and I got to the confluence of two creeks. And when I looked in that way, I could see this energy rising up out of where the creeks came together. And you can just like, you could think, well, how real is that? But it's definitely real. Like even in Qigong class, you could feel the energy that's coming from someone else, and you can feel, and they can feel your energy. You can feel your own energy. You can, like share it somehow. There was a coworker of mine who learned about this training from me, and then she really took it all the way. She became a Chinese medicine doctor, medical doctor, but she started with the Qigong, and she had a couple of dogs, labs, I think, that had this hip dysplasia. So the hip bones, genetically, it's a genetic thing. It's, hip bones don't really fit into the socket in the right way. And she would do qigong over the dog. Like the dog would be in pain, and she just could, with her hands and the qi coming out of her hands, moving over the dog, and she said she could hear the bone click into place. And it's like you're moving it with energy. So there's imagination involved, but there's something more there. Or maybe what what is this experience of being in conventional reality where we think this is real? When we start thinking about the devas, different dimensions, other beings, and we'll have someone like Ajahn Paññavādo say, the devas are as real as we are. So you'll kind of have this sense of things being not really the way we think. And this is helpful to understanding reality and understanding Dhamma. So when we're practicing, even when we look at the early Buddhist texts, we see some examples, I think quite a lot, of using imagination to explore reality, explore conventional reality, and then open up to a deeper understanding of, what do we want to call it, ultimate reality. One clear example is when the Buddha is talking about exploring the body and imagining the parts of the body and imagining a corpse decaying. He doesn't say in the mindfulness of the body that we should actually go and watch the corpse, look at the corpse itself. It's like and it was common to see a corpse in India, in ancient India, decaying. But the Buddha doesn't ask to imagine your own body decaying. He asks you to imagine this corpse, a corpse decaying. So that we do remember that our own body will be like that. So this is a use of imagination. The Thai forest masters, many of them are very strongly encouraging of body contemplation, and that body contemplation is a kind of imagination. to help us let go of our identification with the body and our deep attachment to this idea of who we think we are. And of course, in other traditions, Buddhist traditions, like the Tibetan tradition, they really take the imagination and visualization quite far and become quite methodical about it. But even though I haven't studied that, I'll talk a little bit about feeding your demons in a minute, where imagination is really essential, I would say. But even in the, in the other teachings of the Buddha, all of the similes he uses, like there's a imagination involved in seeing, for example, the different levels of jhana and how PT is described first as, the bath powder that the bath person is soaking with water, and how it becomes saturated completely but doesn't drip. And it's our imagination that allows us to have a sense of that. Or the pool, the lake is fed by this spring, and how the cool water of the spring comes up and pervades the entire lake. Or the lotus in the water, completely saturated from the root to the tip with water. So these are different ways you might feel PT. And related to the fourth jhana, this idea of your whole body being wrapped in cotton. And I'm not so interested in like, well, is it this jhana or that jhana? But you have these experiences, especially when we develop a sensitivity to energy. PT is energy, and it's a this uplifting, healing saturation. When I visited Ajahn Biak once, he said, PT, you want PT through your whole body, in every pore of your skin. PT. And so this is kind of like, it can start with some imagination, you think, is this real or am I making this up? People will say the same thing about the process of feeding your demons. Like when you're using this method, you're invited to imagine this feeling that you have, that you're locating in your body. Maybe it's a feeling of sadness or anger or resentment, or just suffering, some kind of pain. You don't even have to put a label on it. It's not about what caused it or exactly what kind of flavor of dukkha, but to feel the feeling in the body. And then you're invited to really observe its characteristics, a color, a shape, a size, a texture. And then to start to imagine this, if it were a living being, what would it look like? So what happens at that point? This imagining. And when Lama Tsultrim was asked, like, am I just making this up? And she's like, yes, you're just making this up. This is coming from your imagination. But at some point in these experiences and practice, there's something more that's happening. It's like with, having this idea in the mind, there's the mental kind of thinking mind activity, maybe it is, or maybe it's starting to reach more into the intuition, because that's where this is going. The intuition is coming from a deeper level of consciousness. And then, what comes up from intuition can often be surprising and informative. And it's like when in that, I read a small section of the biography of Ajahn Jia, where Ajahn Mun is talking about nimittas, and in there, he said there are times when the nimitta is informative and you can investigate it. You take it inside and you inquire about it. And this is kind of what's happening. This is what's happening with feeding your demons. So you're really going to investigate this. And there's a point where it's imagination, but you just go with it. And then when you start to investigate it, you're dipping into that deeper layer of intuition. And what's interesting about this is that just like in a Qigong class, when you're feeling the energy moving from across the room towards you from another student, or you're working on someone with this healing process of energy, and you feel what they're doing there, if they're working on you and you can feel how they're moving the energy, it's like there is something shared here. Kind of gives you the sense that it's more real. And where reality and imagination kind of meet, it's hard to say. What does it mean for something to be real? I remember one time I went to someone for a medical Qigong session and I didn't know them at all. And afterwards, I described what I was feeling, and that was exactly what she had been doing. So it's like you can feel energy movement even without knowing anything intellectually about what's going to happen. So there's some kind of reality there. Also, I know of someone who had a very vivid and detailed, expanded past life memory. And then a friend who lived some couple hundred miles away wrote a song about a situation. And when she shared it, it was the exact memory that this person had from a past life. It's like we are connected in a certain kind of like mystical kind of sense. Or there's something there that we're drawing from as a collective, or we're all maybe drawing from. So when we're talking about practice and development on the path, imagination is a very valuable tool, probably essential. And the ability to let go enough of the thinking mind to feel a response that comes from deeper inside, I think, is also essential. And then when we practice letting the mind settle into what we might call altered states of consciousness, then we're opening ourselves up to a deeper understanding of Dhamma, of reality, that comes without having any previous presence in our experience. So when the Buddha talked about the night of his enlightenment and how light and vision and knowledge arose that had not been known before, where does that come from? We don't need to know that. I don't, let's see how to say this. At every juncture where my intellect has wanted to prove something, like, is this monk really psychic? Or something like that. I've stepped back from that, because there's this sense in myself that if I try to make this concrete, if I try to gather proof in that way, I'm going to restrict the experience in a way that I don't want to restrict it. I don't know if that makes sense. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Okay. I hope it makes sense, because, it's like to try to push on this kind of understanding of things, or opening up to what we haven't known before from a materialistic point of view, and they really kind of can strangle the unfolding. At the same time, though, we want to guide the mind with all of its imaginative potential down a path that is in accordance with Dhamma and not distracted into, like, most nimittas are just not going to provide value in this regard, or distracted into other kinds of imagining that can lead us down dead ends. One place that I look sometimes for more accessible examples is just in our own thinking of, like, what are the things that we imagine that are unhelpful? Imagining what someone else thinks of us is probably a dead end. Imagining, I don't know if I'm coming up with any other examples at the moment, but the imagining of things that kind of start to bring us down or deplete our energy, those are going to be dead ends. But imagining what's in accordance with Dhamma, like when we practice the Brahma Viharas, there's an imagining there that's really helpful, that actually taps into that universal, unbounded energy of metta, etc. It's very helpful. So this afternoon, I'm planning to guide a session of feeding your demons. And it's going to be at 2:00 today. It's not going to be recorded. So if you're able to show up today, but if you hear this recording later, you can find you can find recordings online of Lama Sultram guiding people through feeding your demons, and you can just use recordings like that. I know there's a recording of me doing this on YouTube. You can look around for that to give yourself some idea of how this works. You can guide yourself. You can read the book together with a friend and guide each other. And you can kind of get an idea for how this works. But this afternoon, when we talk about this, first of all, feeding your demons isn't really about demons. They don't have to be ugly or scary. Sometimes they are, but not necessarily. It can show up as anything. An animal. I've had a small child be a quote unquote demon. It's whatever represents this difficult feeling that has arisen out of some kind of contact where we are experiencing dukkha, and we're able to identify where this dukkha is most strongly represented in the body. And then we let go of the story. So our imagining that goes into our stories is one of the places we really get stuck. We can get stuck there blaming something in the world, blaming other people, and we're not going to make progress that way. If we think the cause of our suffering is outside of ourselves, we've totally let go of our own power and the reality that it takes something inside, some misunderstanding of reality, to actually experience this dukkha. But when we feel it, and we use our imagination to see its color, to experience its texture, to know how big it is, to understand its whether it's solid, whether it's cold, or whatever temperature, and so on. There are various things we can kind of ask ourselves, and then let that come, whether it's from imagination or it's from our intuition. It starts to shape into some kind of image. And as it does, you start to invite it to appear as a living being, obviously still in our imagination. And noticing if it has limbs, what they're like, what its color is, kind of a sense of its personality or its mood, its mental state. And then as we interrogate it, no, that's not the right word. We want to be a little kinder than that. Investigate, inquire from it. There are 3 questions that we'll ask. What do you want from me? What do you need from me? And how will you feel when you get what you need? But we don't answer those questions ourselves from our own position. So again, we're going to imagine. A lot of times, especially in the beginning of using this process, it's good to have another seat facing you on the other side, and then get up and actually sit down in that seat. That's where you're visualizing this quote unquote demon. And you take on the persona, the qualities, the character of the demon. So this is another way to imagine. And what's interesting, as an aside here, is that our personalities change constantly. So Ayya Chitananda introduced me to a little video clip of Mushroom Man, and he's saying something like, "Oh, you like my personality? Well, I'm glad you do, because it's not my personality. It's a gift for you. It's the personality. I have a different one for everyone. And this is the personality I have made for you. I hope you like it. And it's really designed because of what you respond to." And if you really think about it, our personality changes, or can at least, by being with different people. Well, how to use this in practice is that this personality is not stable, reliable, a constant thing. It's constantly changing. Do I really think that's me? No. And so this is all like, yes, we're using our imagination, but we know that all this stuff is changing. All of it is, none of it is solid. None of it is to be identified with. None of it should be clung to. Okay, back to feeding your demons. You're taking on this character. And then you answer those questions from that character. And here, hopefully, it's coming from a deeper layer, a layer that's not coming from the thinking mind, the intuition, because the answers are often surprising and in really helping us gain some insight into our own wiring, which is all process, not self. And it's through those answers, especially to the question of, well, the questions, what do you want from me? The answer to that one is like, what's on the surface of what we want from this person I perceive as me? What do we want? What does that demon want? That can be kind of negative, rough, maybe. But what do you need from me? The next question is deeper. And the example I always use to help clarify this came from raising teenagers. What they want from you, they might be really mad at you. They might really want you to be miserable. They really might feel like they hate you. But what they need from you is your love, is your respect, is your attention, etc. And that's where you want to kind of drop from that first question to the second question into what does the demon really need? And then the third question is, how will you feel when you get what you need? And when you answer that question from this place of the demon, we're really getting at what it is that seems to be lacking, that is sort of at the ground, at the base of why I'm experiencing dukkha. So the first noble truth was coming into play, you might say, from the very beginning of feeling this in your body and exploring it and seeing it as a demon. And then you shift into the demon's character. And there you're really looking for the root in the second noble truth. You're really looking at the basis, the cause, but it's not an intellectual process. Because we use the intellect all the time to try to understand this thing, and we can only go so far. We're not really usually unlocking it that way. So when we're in that more intuitive space, maybe a little bit of an altered consciousness, and this answer of how I'll feel when I get what I need from the demon's character and perspective, then we know what this demon should be fed. So we shift back into the space of our own personality, our own body. When we get collected in there again. And when we start to, so what is this whole idea of feeding? You don't want to, instead of fighting, instead of pushing away the dukkha, we turn towards it, like the Buddha said in the first noble truth. We come to understand it. And then in the second noble truth, there is a cause, and we have to abandon it. This is how we abandon it, by providing, feeding this demon what it's going to feel: safety. I'll feel loved. I'll feel respected, etc. Whatever comes up. Could be something you never thought of before. But you're feeding, and you're in this process as it's developed based on this ancient Tibetan practice. It's an experience of letting your body dissolve into this nectar that is this quality. Call it safety right now. But what I've noticed in practice is that I become filled with this quality, of safety or love or respect or joy or peace, whatever it is that demon would feel when it's fully satisfied. And by feeling that, I'm already experiencing some of that cessation of the third noble truth. Whatever triggered this experience of dukkha is like, who cares? But now it's like just being filled with this quality that has been, in my perception at least, lacking. And so feeding the demon this, then the visual image of this demon starts to change. Because once it's taking this on, just like the whole kind of felt sense and atmosphere in my own system has changed, this image changes. Sometimes it just disappears. It can dissolve into emptiness, or it can transform into something else. And sometimes when people are doing this, this isn't just coming easily, like it's not just appearing. Sometimes it really just like the whole thing unfolds and you're getting a lot of good information from it and all of that, but sometimes it's slower, and that's okay. When I do this with a group of people, of course, it may not be on the timing that actually is perfect for everyone. That makes sense, right? But you're getting a taste of how it goes. And then when you work with it on your own, you can take the time that you need. You can allow things to unfold, or you can always add a little more from your imagination. It's like, okay, maybe the demon just seems insatiable. You're supposed to feed the demon this quality until it's completely satisfied. Well, if it feels like it's just a bottomless pit, then the advice is to just say, well, what would you look like if you were completely satisfied? And then the imagination provides that that image. So it's important to kind of let go of any idea of how this should work. This is how we have to practice too. If we're gonna tap into the deep Dhamma and our whole perspective of how reality is put together changes, it's necessary to let go of our preconceptions, or let go of our current way of thinking, our own views, to see the reality. And so even in this process, we can experience that and allow whatever comes to come. And then there's a process that it can end right there with the Dhamma being satisfied, or you can see what's now in front of you as an ally. And then there are another set of questions that we ask the ally. And we change places and become the ally. And when that happens, we might have a surge of this kind of beautiful feeling again of what it is to have the strength or the solidity, the awareness of the ally. I'm not going to go through the questions exactly, but an ally can be an image, a sort of a experience of something that actually we can call upon when we're in situations where we might be triggered, where we might feel, whatever your particular pattern produces of some kind of dukkha. And then that ally can kind of be there as a support, even when we go into situations where we're likely be triggered. Being with the family for Christmas, who knows what, like where you want to take this ally with you, I mean, the people we love the most might be the most obvious source of some kind of triggering of an old pattern that we have. And the point is that when we really do take 100% responsibility for our experience, we also need to bring these kinds of tools to the fore and use them to understand this patterning in us so that we can dissolve it and not have to be imprisoned by it anymore. And so much of this is through that kind of process of imagining, of tapping into our intuition and our accessing deeper truths that don't change, the Dhamma. And the result is freedom. And even when we are not yet at the point where we have the whole picture of that which doesn't change. Because one thing, I know Ajahn Sumedho says, you can't imagine Nibbana. It says it can't be done. We haven't seen that yet. It's not, and there are other things that no matter how hard we might try, like imagining being outside of time, we might think we can imagine it, but actually we need to experience it. We don't experience it from this place of conventional reality. We don't know these things from the position of our personality, of our identity view. It's stepping outside of that. It's letting go of that. That we can begin to know that directly. That's what I think. So, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Ayya. In the past, I tried a couple of times your previous guided feeding your demon guided meditation.
Mm-hmm.
When that happened, I couldn't imagine any persona.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it would just come up kind of a lump like a paint, some sort of color. They're very messy. I tried to follow a couple of times, like thinking of imagine a monster, or it just doesn't come. I wonder, is that a problem, or how
I
should
don't
I?
think it's a problem. I think you just go with the messy blob of paint, or whatever it is. And, sometimes people will like the first thing that comes to their mind is some cartoon character or something, and just go with it. Whatever the first thing is, you just like, okay. And then you just see it there, and it could be anything. And then you just with your, it's like, I think a lot of times what happens is that we want something to happen. But if we let go of wanting something to happen and just be open to whatever, then see what happens. And then just go with that. And then it's like, okay, I've got this messy blob. Okay. And then, oh, what would you look like if you were a being? See if something happens, some image comes, and whether we don't worry if the thought comes, well, am I making this up? It's like, yeah, you're making it up. Doesn't matter. Just yeah. And sometimes we have to do it a few times. And some people have told me, yeah, came to this thing, but I don't visualize. I don't. And then afterwards they're like, wow, somebody, so you just go with whatever happens without thinking about it very much. Paula?
I think Holly's next.
No, I think you're next. Just go for it.
All right.
Did it change things around?
It
Sorry.
does do that. You're not wrong, Paula, but it's okay. Go ahead.
Okay. What I found was I thought I was going to work on one demon, and then suddenly I had like 10. I thought of all these other demons that I had. And so that's okay. I kind of plugged away at a couple, 3. But then I was confused because, I had all these different allies, and I didn't know, like, if you could have the same ally or the same way of touching into the ally. Like, it seemed like, just putting my hand on my heart was a great way, but that kept coming up, the same sort of thing with different And I'm just wondering if you can speak to, because I know I mentioned that last night that I had multiple.
Okay, so when you say you have multiple demons, are you saying in one session?
Mm.
No, many sessions. Each in a different session? Oh, I can't hear you.
What happened was that once I thought of one demon, I could think of other ones that I could work on, but not all in one session. Like I would work on one at a time. I haven't worked on them all, but
Yeah, so
I
when
thought
you,
of different things that I could use as demons.
okay, yes. So in the beginning, when you sit down to do this process, then you do choose one thing to work on. And you can, I mean, obviously the way we talk about it, you can work on the demon of feeling abandoned, or the demon of feeling put down, or some, whatever that is. But when we work on it, then there's one visualization. I mean, it can change in the process. But just choose one for each session. And you can always because I've talked a number of times about a period of time when I made the aditan to work with every triggering experience. And in that case, they're kind of stacked up, until you have the time, which could be like, go home in the evening from work and take time. But they're done separately. But the thing that happens is that you start to realize that there's a commonality. At least that was my experience among them. Eventually, kind of like when you drill down to the depths, there might just be one kind of underlying misapprehension of reality there. And and keeping a journal I found really helpful. I kept a pad of paper next to me, and you would write down what the answers were to the questions, even though I had to kind of like open my eyes and do that for a second and then go back into the felt sense. And I found that helpful because when I would come out of the experience, I wouldn't remember things, and then I could go back and review it. I don't know if that's helping for your question.
Yeah, that's helpful. And also, I had that same experience where if I tried to write it down afterwards, I didn't remember. But I've been using like a journaling app because I don't like to write so much. But that worked really well for me. And I think next time I'll open my eyes and just speak the answers out, like you said.
Yeah.
But yeah, the only other thing is if you can have the same way of contacting the ally if you are having more than one.
Yeah, just go into it. Just try to let that answer come intuitively. And if it comes with the same thing, sure. It's totally fine.
Okay.
There's no like real rules around any of that.
Yeah.
It's like what comes up is coming up from in you. Whether we see it as imagination or we see it as an intuition, as we see it as, the Dhamma coming through, arising in us, we wanna always recognize, whether this is, we want to know if this is somehow off the Dhamma, not in line with Dhamma, and I have never experienced that. I just want to like say, okay, just if we stick with this wholesome intention to understand, and we're really wanting to know the Dhamma, and it's like throughout practice, I've always said yes to the Dhamma, regardless of whatever else it destroys in my life. And so you just continue to say yes. I'm going to open more deeply to this truth, this experience, and what comes is going to be helpful. And we don't need to second guess it.
That's helpful to connect it to the Dhamma. Thank you.
Yeah. Holly?
About 35 years ago, I worked with a great therapist, a Jungian Buddhist, and did something like this. And so my question is it common that one does work with the demon, it becomes some ally, and then years later you meet that same demon needs another session. So I'm
Yeah,
finding that as I go through listening to your moving us through this exercise again, that a similar demon, the eel in the cave, that it's dark and wants to get away and stay there because the world is too wild and crazy and I don't want to come out. Still has some work to be done on it, so I will do that. But it's interesting because that's 35 years ago, and that was really valuable work back then. But it has another layer that's pending.
Yep.
Is that typical?
It's very typical. I mean, until we're fully awakened, we might find layers of this conditioning from who knows how long it's been, building there. And there's going to be some, residue that we can still uncover. So yeah, it's very typical.
I appreciate your leading us from the feeding the demons to the Dhamma. That could be developed a little better for me. Thank you.
Yeah, it's so wonderful to see that this is really what the Buddha was teaching us. It's like not the process of feeding your demons, but the process of the noble truths. And the feeding your demons is just an example. We can do it in other ways, but there's always this turning towards the suffering and being present with it and understanding it. Really observing it, really opening up to it, really being able to take it in and understand it. This knowing that there's a cause, and the cause is not outside ourselves. The cause is not the tragedy that occurred, the death, the loss, the humiliation that we've experienced, and who has been sort of the instrument of that to cause this dukkha. That's not the cause, but the cause is really wanting something to be different than it is, the wanting that sensual experience to be satisfying, to be different than it is, wanting to become, or wanting to get rid of. And when we're talking about these demons and how, we see what the misunderstanding is, like, I want safety, I want this, I want that. It's like, it's the same thing. It's these three different kinds of roots of cause of this suffering. And how do we abandon it? Well, in this process of feeding your demons, we abandon it by recognizing that whatever it is we feel like we're lacking is actually there in full abundance. This kind of starts to touch on, like Ajahn Sumedho telling people, you're perfect. You're perfect now, just the way you are. Your personality is not perfect. The way you act is not perfect. The way you think is not perfect, but there's a perfection of Dhamma, which is really your true nature. And whatever we think we're lacking is just the result of our conditioning. So we start to experience the cessation of that dukkha. And we every time there's dukkha, we meet this dukkha with this presence, this willingness, this guidance, so that we can work all the way through it. When we work all the way through it, it's not going to have the same potency it had before when it comes around again. So when you investigate this eel in the cave again, it's not going to be as big as that fire-breathing Naga in the fire chamber that the Buddha subdued and came out in the morning with this little snake in his bowl. You know, it's like it's going to be different, and we lose our fear of it because really, it really isn't real. Suzanne.
Ayya, thank you so very much for this talk. I have used feeding your demon just a couple times, and it was very valuable. It might not work for everyone. It's like lots of stuff, but I do plan to come this afternoon, and I really appreciate it. I want to go back to what I'm conscious of time also. I know you need to finish soon. I want to go back to something you talked about earlier in the talk, just the idea of imagination. I feel this is so important for practitioners to hear. And I've never heard a talk about imagination. So thank you so much. I'm curious about a couple different things because I've been using imagination more in the Anapanasati, the 16 steps, because now, I just want to check this out. It kind of reminds me, like, I think earlier, a couple weeks ago, you had said that the ministerial training you did was based on Kriya Yoga. And isn't that based on kind of Philip Moffat's ideas about the 9 bodies?
I have no idea about Philip Moffat's 9 bodies, but I'm sure
okay.
maybe what he's talking about is kind of based on Kriya Yoga, but Kriya Yoga is quite ancient.
Okay.
So
So,
it's I don't know where those models meet, but
okay. Well,
yeah,
it's interesting. It's an interesting model, but he talks about like the bodies, like the physical body. Okay, that would be
I
the
mean, they
first.
do talk about these layers, right? So
Yeah.
there's the physical body, and then there's a layer, you know, an energetic body that's really right at the surface there, and there the breath is really like the connector between that energetic body and the physical body. So breath is often thought of as breath energy. And in the Thai tradition, they'll talk about it that way. The breath energy goes in. When you breathe in, you're breathing in, and the breath energy actually goes through the whole body. And this is very related to PT. So this is, it's not, we can have all these labels and these concepts, but in the actual experience of it, you start to recognize that it's the way that it's how things are working. You know, you breathe in, if you're aware of that energy, you know, it just can permeate the whole body. And the more we sort of experience it that way, the more that PT develops. Anyway, what were you going to say about the?
Well, yeah, I was just going to ask you because, okay, the second tetrad is like the feeling, if you want to call it layer or feeling body. And then there's the third tetrad, the mind layer or the mind. Anyway, in the imagination here, it just seems like those are different bodies. So I can just like, it feels like the physical body is almost like a shell, like almost like a lobster shell, and I can't just keep, and as I go into the physical, I'm sorry, the feeling layer, it's a different layer inside the shell. Does that make sense?
It could
Maybe
be.
not.
I don't visualize it that way myself.
Okay.
Partly because I think I experienced the physical body becoming more, I guess, seeing through its physicality to just its energetic nature. And you know, when you're going into deeper levels of concentration, the physical body disappears. So I
Yeah.
don't see I don't see the feeling sort of as inside the body, but it's like however you imagine, however you perceive it, you know, like perception, the imagination is related to perception, it's related to memory. I mean, memory is an imagination. You know, how differently we remember the same experience we shared with someone else. It's like there's so much here that, you know, to utilize but not take too seriously. Not be sort of stuck in the one way of seeing.
Okay.
So it can be experienced that way. See if it's useful to experience it that way. What brings more peace and freedom? You know, the ultimate sort of directional sign that the Buddha used was, does it bring more peace?
Thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah, I'm welcome.